Right, hello everyone and welcome to the Shooting Art Podcast. I'm your host Ross Baxter and today is episode 38 of the series, and today we have Stefan Oprisan on the show. How you doing, man?
Not too bad, very excited and very nervous at the same time.
Trust me, man, you'll do great, you'll be awesome. I was so happy to have you on because I was just literally just saying to him, it's like you're the second texture artist we have on, and I really want to start getting more of you guys on. It'll be really good.
Yeah.
Everyone who's tuning in, by the way, if you're new to the podcast is a weekly series where I bring on guests from the creative industries, whether it's from game or from film, you name it, the podcast covers it. I like to get industry experts, just overall opinion, and also recent students as well, and just see what they have to say about student education and I guess just art in general. And it's the podcast, as always, is live on 9 other platforms alongside YouTube. We are on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and last but not least, we've got Stitcher. And if you guys are tuning in on YouTube right now, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. That would be much appreciated. And obviously, as always, like, the main focus and main reason I do this podcast is you guys, like, use the students. So if you want to share your art links in the comments below, make sure to do that, and I'll give you a shout out in the next podcast. But with all that said, it's all about Stefan today. So thanks once again, man, and let's just get into it. Let's do this.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So as always, just start off a wee bit about yourself. So just introduction. So tell us a wee bit who you are and so forth.
Cool, okay, so like Ross said, my name's Stefan. I'm 25 years old. I currently work as a texture/material artist at Frontier in Cambridge. I've been doing sort of 3D for like 8-9 years, but professionally for just over 2. And I'd say my main passion is environment and obviously material art.
Awesome. So like, where did it start originally? Was it sort of like obviously you're saying you've done it for many years, but like when did this all come a thing? Like when was art like when did you know that this was like the career you wanted to go into?
So I didn't really, well, it kind of started when I originally went to uni to do animation because I wanted to, to do games animation.
Okay.
And everyone who was basically doing the course at Teesside, regardless of what you were doing, the first year was always exactly the same. So it was always design, animation, art, a bit of history. And, we did everything. We touched a bit of pretty much every single module that you can think of. And then in the second year, you could sort of specialize in art or animation, design. And when I was doing my environment module, it sort of clicked that, this is actually, I actually enjoy this a lot more than over animation.
Yeah.
And it sort of just pushed me to want to do environment art as my main degree, basically.
Awesome. No, that's great. Because I was kind of I was sort of on the same sort of idea, like same sort of path as you in a way, but obviously different in many ways as well. But so I used to love animation as well. Like animation was my thing. So I did a thing called Animation Mentor.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing course. If you're an animator and you're tuning in right now, highly recommend it. It's literally the best thing out there for animators. Personally, that's my own perspective on it. But then obviously it was environment art that kind of clicked with me because it was like Tintin that I was always obsessed about. And I've mentioned that many times in the podcast. But obviously, like, there's so many great things that we can talk about today that Stefan's done. So he's done so many things with 80 level. Like, oh my gosh, the amount of stuff I learnt today through reading over your 80 level stuff was insane. Like, there's so much stuff about texture I'd really like to go into depth about. But also, I was saying to you before the podcast, like talking about like your Tomb Raider piece. Like, dude, like that, like the main front part. That's so awesome. Like, I really like that. Like the main central piece, like your hero asset.
Yeah.
But before we, as always, I always ask like the same sort of 4 main questions on the podcast. So like about university, etc. And it was so the ones I sent you. But starting off, I always like ask like, is there anything you kind of wish you learned while you were studying at university?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, looking back at it now, we sort of were taught like almost the overview of specific components of, let's say, environment art, like topology, loading, unwrapping that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what really sort of is key to doing it as a professional thing is kind of like the stuff that you learn when you're, I would say, on the job, and potentially depending on the type of game you're working on. So stuff like textile density, vertex normal, trim sheets, proper PBR mapping in terms of which values you're supposed to apply, and making sure that they are scientifically accurate, and just making sure that you always rely sort of on the art bible that the game is supposed to be and the art direction.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you are creating someone's vision and idea of what the game is supposed to be like.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that you understand what they're trying to sort of explain to you through words, you have to sort of translate that sort of on 3D or on 2D and then in the game essentially.
Yeah.
And that really doesn't really come at university, because they just want to sort of teach you what you need to know, and then they sort of tell you, okay, go and do it, and then we'll give you some feedback, and then you go and do it again, and then more feedback, and then they grade you.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's enough sort of why you do certain things, as to, you do it, and then that's pretty much it. They don't tell you specifically why do you need to do it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you really learn. It sort of hits you when you read like an 80 level or a video tutorial by somebody who's in the industry, or you do a mentorship, or potentially even when you start your new job.
Yeah.
I think.
I guess not. Also, oh my god, this is gonna be so good. So much great knowledge straight away. So like when it comes to like what you said there, like the why. This is a question that I've only mentioned I think twice so far on the podcast, and that's basically do you think universities I don't know. I'm trying to think who brought this up. I think it was it was Carmen. So I did a great podcast with Carmen. So Carmen works at Cloud Imperium Games, and we raised the question of do you think universities are designed to prepare you for the industry, or is it more about just exploration and learning like what your career path is? Like, what's your thoughts on that? Like, what do you think? Do you think they should be obviously I agree exactly what you said there. I think they should be more, or at least later on in the last few years, about teaching you how to be ready.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what your thoughts are.
I think that, so to understand your question, I think it's almost a two-way street, where if you really want to know this information, you need to ask, because yes, the teacher is supposed to tell you this stuff, but you might get students who are potentially there just to pass.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, you want to make sure that you obviously you give everyone the same opportunity to learn and to teach and everything, but if there's somebody that potentially stands out, they could potentially help a bit more, you can go sort of have a more in-depth one-to-one with them to explain or give further feedback. But I think as a whole, because in university they have to teach so many people, you can't cater to every single person. Definitely. You have classes where you might have 20 people and you can sort of have a few extra minutes with them. But when you have a lecture of 200 or 300 people, it's quite hard to sort of answer everyone's sort of question in an hour. Yeah. So there's a lot I'm sure that lecturers would want to give information, but students I think need to do more in terms of finding that for themselves. Yeah,
it's the working on the side kind of thing, because I don't know what it was like for you when you're at uni. So for me personally, I'm pretty sure the exact same. So obviously, you work really hard, and you're constantly working on making sure to get the best art as you can through your time at university. But I think a lot of people have to start acknowledging the fact that when you finish university, you're not guaranteed a job, and you have to kind of make sure that you're doing things at the side that give you an advantage.
Yeah.
One of the greatest things that you did something very similar to one of my friends. Well, not as in what you were learning, but it was just your approach was very, I think, very methodical. So when you chose to do your honours project or your fourth year project, so everyone is. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot. Everyone who's listening in, by the way, all 1800 of you, go check out his social medias and give him a follow. You'll see all his social medias highlighted on the screen. So all 1800 of you, go appreciate the man's work. He makes incredible art. And like the piece I'm talking about just now is so he made a Tomb Raider piece. And the great thing I like about this project is that you thought about like photogrammetry, mega scans, and like when I was at uni, I never like thought about that. Maybe it's just because I wasn't introduced really much into it by like the studies. But it'd be great if you could talk about that piece, because that was or just about your whole sort of journey with that piece.
So that piece was basically at the time when I was sort of deciding what I wanted to do. I was deciding whether to do something Tomb Raider, because luckily I was playing the game and I was just in love with the whole storyline and the narrative of the whole Tomb Raider universe. And it was between Tomb Raider and The Division. And obviously at the time I was playing the game, and it sort of tipped it in doing something Tomb Raider related. And I picked that piece because it just gave a great insight into the narrative of the game, into exploration of like the mural, which is basically the main sort of piece. Like when you watch the video, that's the focus on. That's that's what catches your eye essentially. And essentially I just wanted to do something that was really, really narratively sort of striking, but very sort of part of the Tomb Raider universe. Like I wanted to sort of mimic it so close that you couldn't sort of, obviously you could tell apart from the game, but you could feel like it's Tomb Raider. Like if you played the game, or if you didn't, or if you just saw a couple of screenshots of what the game looked like, you'd have an understanding of why I chose to do that.
Yeah, like dude, trust me, you nailed it. Like based on what I saw and what I was reading into, is like you can tell you nailed the art style. And like that's hard to do, and not only like you nailed the art style, but you really thought about like, I guess like obviously like you're saying it was like obviously very story orientated. Like story is a great one, and obviously when it comes to texturing as well, like I'm not sure if a lot of people, like this is where my knowledge lacks in terms of my understanding of texture artists. But when it comes to like texture art, when I was at uni, it wasn't really like a much raised role. It was mainly obviously environment artists discussing about like how to make good textures and stuff, but there wasn't much like narrative thought behind it, if that makes sense. And like
I can see what you mean.
Like you agree?
I can definitely agree. I mean it depends on what you want to sort of do, because if you want to do something that has a very distinctive palette of colors, of tones, of a type of surfaces, the way they respond to the lighting, you need to make something that it's very, very easy to keep track of and sort of follow through, because once you sort of have your base foundations to work with, you always have those elements that are consistent throughout everything. And that's something that was mentioned in I think Ben Wilson's talk. He, in one of his videos where they talked about Wolfenstein, he mentions that they used throughout every single assets and textures two material elements, which is like dust and dirt.
Right. Okay.
So everything, when they were pieced together with the trims, with the destruction, with the rubble, they all had those layers of materials that unify them.
Yeah.
So that's what I think a lot of students don't do, is make sure that there is a connection between the assets and sort of the world they are building, because they could make this really, really like these amazing sort of assets, but they feel disconnected from the actual universe. Yeah. If that makes sense. So I see a lot of people, when they make certain props, they just sort of put them on the ground thinking how it should look, but they feel sort of disconnected, like there's no sort of
like cohesion,
like molding between the two.
Okay.
So if you do a piece where, let's say the Tomb Raider environment, where everything is dusty and dirty, you need to make sure that the pieces that you put in the level, they are sort of covered by sand, by dust, by cobwebs, because that creates kind of like unifies everything into something a bit more convincing, as opposed to I can see that rock is a bit standing out. I can see that sort of pillar is a bit, quite apparent.
Yeah,
And if you have these sort of things attached on top of them, you can, I don't know, you can make something a bit more believable, I think.
definitely.
And that's something that sells basically your piece a lot more.
Because like you said, like obviously like when it comes to like the believability thing. So like when I was reading your article, you said it sounds so obvious, but I think so many people overlook it. Is like, so do you know when you were talking about on the article about like the pillars, and then obviously it had to like merge within the stone because it was carved within the stone.
Yeah.
So like it's like being able to make sure like obviously I'm reiterating what you said, but it's like everything has to like obviously come together as one and like make sense. And one of the great things as well that like obviously carrying on the whole idea of story that I really appreciated about everything that you've done and all the articles for 80 level is like how thorough you are with like your layers, etc. And like so for example like you have like your damaged parts, your cavities, your edges, your grunge maps, your dark variation, your light variation. Like there's so much depth that's adding to the story that you're like as you're going along.
Yeah.
And I just think it's like when it comes to like the story in general, like everyone has to keep thinking about like how they guide the viewer, and or the player, shall I say? Like obviously like this stuff applies not just to games; it obviously applies to film in a way as well. Like there's a balance between the two.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like obviously when it comes to like university and stuff, like what's been like the benefits, I guess, of going to university? Like what was the best things?
So I think, well, obviously the most obvious ones is that you learn from professionals who have literally been doing this for 20, 30 years. And, obviously some would argue that, yeah, some of the stuff that they're teaching you might not be as relevant because, as we all know, the industry is just moving so fast. It's hard to keep track for them, for the teachers, but also for the students themselves with what's happening. But having that solid foundation of 20 years of experience to rely on, it's priceless because you can't sort of put a price on that sort of knowledge, I think. And you just have to ask and just be like, why do you do that? Why do you need to do this? Why have these things done like this?
Yeah.
Or how can I improve it? Or and they might be like, okay, this is because the technology we had back then wasn't as great, so we had to work around with these sort of solutions, which is still applying to today. Because if you make, let's say, games for like phones or consoles, you have to adhere to certain limitations.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing it for potentially a personal piece or for the film industry, you don't really have to rely on those things. So knowing as to why I need to make sure that this tiny little pebble shouldn't be 3,000 triangles, you know why, and you could spend that sort of effort and sort of performance somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's knowing why and how to apply them somewhere else to get the benefit of it all.
Definitely, because like I think that like the main thing about the whole like sort of like teacher thing is that like I'm not sure how hard it is. Like for example, the university that I went to, they've like I don't know how much in depth about it, but it's like they've been going through a phase of trying to find a lot of teachers, and like I have no idea like if there's just such a limitation of teachers at the moment, because there used to be a time that teachers like were always like the main thing, like everyone always wanted to be a teacher. And like especially up in here in Scotland, like I know tons of people who have gone into to like learn how to be a teacher, and but I think it's so hard when it comes to the teaching aspect, because since we're doing an industry that's so like I'm not sure the correct words, like niche, like new, but it's like obviously it's growing at such a rapid pace and stuff, but it's I think it's still hard in certain places to get the right like expertise.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I mean, like you said, it's just so rapidly evolving. Even the people who are sort of in the industry, it might be quite hard for them to keep up with what's happening out there.
Yeah.
Like, you have all these talks from GDC, SIGGRAPH, Epic, and, all these things. And you have all this knowledge that's being passed on that, yeah, sure, some teachers can sort of take that and apply it to certain modules, but by the time that sort of gets introduced to next year that's probably like a common thing potentially, and it's it's like in the past potentially. So it has to be literally something that if you learn something new, you need to sort of pass it on, especially as a teacher, very, very quickly, I think.
Yeah.
Because, by the time you tell them, they'll be like, okay, well, I already knew that. So,
like, it's crazy because like the great thing obviously about having you on is that you've like I've said it earlier, is like the amount of range and skill set that you learnt through like your final project and stuff was amazing. And the big topic of photogrammetry and your mega scans, for example, like the great thing about mega scans is that you got your material library, etc., to have access to. But there's so many people, I think, like even myself, like I know nothing at the moment about photogrammetry or mega scans. It was just because it wasn't a thing that I ever kind of got brought up to me, or I never kind of felt like I needed to learn until like over the last I've had probably about 4 podcasts in the last. Well, I've had 4 guests over probably the last 8 guests. How am I trying to word this? So 4 of my last 8 guests, I've brought up the topic of photogrammetry and stuff, and I think it's just important to kind of highlight why it's a great thing to look into. Like everyone should be learning and exploring it because it's such a great thing to do. Like take your project for example. Like you learned how important like the detail like that came from that.
Yeah.
It'd be great if you're okay just to talk us a wee bit about photogrammetry.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I started doing it, it was sort of just about sort of coming to the surface about, I think, 4 years ago. So that it was literally nobody was talking about it in terms of my university. So I thought, well, this is something it's fairly new, just like VR was at the time.
Yeah.
Luckily, the university, basically, I rented a camera from the university. So I just went around, just scanned a bunch of stuff locally. I ran it through some, pipelines that I read online of how things should be done. And then, I essentially just came with scans, essentially, which you could put in the game. And that is pretty much what got me my job at Playground.
Awesome.
Because they saw that I was doing some scans, some rock scans, and some trees. And they thought, okay, this person clearly knows somewhat of the pipeline. They have discussed it on level 80, so they must have some understanding of it. And nobody was really sort of interested at the time. They were still sort of focused in Painter when they were sort of around in Quixel. So I used that opportunity to leverage myself to sort of be ahead of everyone, which obviously paid massively because I managed to graduate well before a lot of people and get in industry fairly quick.
Awesome.
So I think I was quite lucky because obviously it was great to actually the university letting me to rent the equipment, because that's one of the big things about photo scanning. If you really want to make the best out of it, you need to have a solid understanding of why you need to use this focal length and this ISO and the exposure to the right sky and intensity, and all these scientific things that they might seem quite hard to grasp, just like PBR when you start being introduced. But once you read into it, you just need to make sure that your camera is at this setting. You don't go and do it when it's really, really bright or rainy.
Okay.
And you take as many photos, you run it through a color checker, and you essentially just run it through the software at whatever setting, and just take it from there essentially.
Wow, right, okay. I had no idea. Like I was saying, like, I'm new to this thing, so I was thinking it was going to be like obviously there's probably like a wee bit more extra to it, but I didn't realize like that's how it worked.
It's really, really easy once you wrap your head around the whole technicality and sort of like the checklist of what you need to do. Make sure you have a decent camera. You can literally do it with your phone, right? If you've got an iPhone or a Samsung or whatever, take some screenshots of the floor or a rock or whatever. If you're not even bothered about the color checker to make sure that it's color corrected, it's fine. It's perfectly fine if you want to just play around with it. Run it through Agisoft or Reality Capture, and you instantly pretty much get your high poly texture and your scan, essentially your mesh.
Wow.
And from there on, you just make your game ready in ZBrush, just like a high poly model, really.
Yeah.
and then you project it.
I need to give it a go. Everyone who's tuning in, please go explore it, because it's just such a powerful thing. And like at the end of the day as well, just remember, it's not something that's going to take anything away from your ability to be creative. Because obviously, like for example, like I'm pretty sure the same. Like I love ZBrush. There's so many ways to use ZBrush, use Maya, 3ds Max. This is purely a tool to help you maybe also like speed up your production, or maybe get something in a scene a bit quicker. Because
yeah, absolutely.
Like there's not like, I think everyone's still kind of under the when I mean everyone, I mean like the students, because obviously they're not so much aware. Like obviously they're finally kind of getting more up to date with things, but I still think it's still relatively new in people's heads at the moment. But
yeah,
you just have to kind of just explore it. Think about where you could put it in your scene, and take it from there. Like even if it's something small, like for example, this is what I personally think is a great example for it, and it's because I learned it from Raphael, like one of the guests that come on. He was saying that the good one is to use it for the ground, like just having like the ground all done through photogrammetry.
Yeah.
Like he was saying, like that's a fun option that makes it's a nice starting point.
Yeah, I mean, before Alchemist was out, you'd pretty much have to run it through the same process as doing as a 3D model. So you take loads of sort of screenshots of a certain area, like a 2x2 meter, and you'd make your tileable, in ZBrush. But now you literally take one photo and then you run it through Alchemist, and you literally get everything out of it. You automatically delete because it's got an AI processing,
right?
Which is powered by NVIDIA. And you get your normal map, your height, your AO, your roughness, and you can pretty much just you literally just use sliders to generate all the maps from a color map.
Awesome! Wow,
it's that easy.
Yeah, because like, no, that's just shocked. It shocked me so much, because like I really need to start going into it and start giving it a go, because it's like it could play such a big part. Because like one of the things that I'm still like, I'm always very honest on the podcast in the sense that like there's miles of improvement that when it comes to the texturing aspect, that I need to get better at. Like I'm still trying to really like modeling's my main thing, like sculpting's my favourite thing, and but there's so much things with texture art that I need to start exploring into more. Like speaking of texture art, like I know that this is like a big kind of question, but like when you think of like good materials and stuff, like what comes to mind? Like if you had to give someone advice to like what it takes to make a good material, like what's the kind of like stepping blocks you would kind of give? Is there anything that kind of stands out to you?
I think going back to what I said before as to like the whys is knowing if obviously you're doing it in, let's say, Designer, which is the main application of I work in, and a lot of people I know when they make textures they potentially do it in Designer. So I'm going to be sort of referencing Designer. Is knowing which sort of nodes you need to use to get that desired effect.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So I saw people when they post stuff on ArtStation that you can tell it's a brick, but it's not the right type of brick because they've used sort of the wrong noise or they've potentially sort of layered it incorrectly. Because one of the things that I like to focus on is analyze the image that I'm working off and break it down into sort of manageable chunks.
Okay.
So it's breaking down how the mortar is, how the brick is shaped, what kind of noise has it got? Has it got cracks? Is it sloped? Is it quite smooth and fresh? What kind of sort of color information has it got? Is knowing sort of this information beforehand to plan ahead really makes it a lot easier to essentially just do it.
Yeah.
Because you don't just sort of slap noise or different sort of blends and think, okay, that's working, but potentially might not because you're not doing it right, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's almost Googling how to layer a brick, essentially, kind of.
Like the sort of like theory behind it.
How the brick is structured.
Brilliant.
That helps a lot because you can then understand, is the brick gonna sort of shift and slope downwards because the mortar hasn't settled, or do I need to make it really, really compact?
Yeah.
So.
no, that's awesome. Thanks for saying that, because I think so many people, when it comes to like when it comes to the student side of things, is that they purely kind of think in a way of aesthetic. Like, I understand that obviously everything has to kind of be appealing and stuff, but the goal personally, so carrying on from the point that you're saying exactly, is that like you have to make sense of the texture that you're making. There has to be like a logic to it. There has to be an understanding of theory, and understanding of efficiency as well. Like tileable textures, when to know how to like save some time instead of like taking ages on like a certain aspect. Like what resolution are you working with? Like there's so many different things, and like obviously like the great thing about texture art is like you have so much power to play with because of how like strong designer is these days. And like even I'm a culprit of this myself. Like I can't wait to start getting into designer. Like at the moment, my new thing I'm learning is foliage. So I'm trying to like master that. So once I kind of learn about that, then I'm going to kind of go into designer again. But I think I don't know. I think people need to start thinking when they're at university more about efficiency and more about purely making game ready assets, because obviously like everyone can make a pretty picture, or at least strive to make a pretty picture, but if it doesn't work within game, then it's kind of pointless.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you make something that has taken you, potentially, a week to do, tileable or something like that, and suddenly, it's actually not what we wanted. Is it just means that you have to go back to the drawing board. And yes, designer is so easy to just iterate on, how many bricks you want. It's knowing, okay, what kind of game is this? How big is the texture going to be in terms of resolution? What's the texture density? How close is the player going to be able to see it? How much detail do I need to put in? Can I reuse something that I've already made? Which is super important as a texture artist, because it's all fun making all these things from scratch, but in production you do not have the time and the luxury to take a whole 5 days to make a brand new tileable. You will have to reuse a lot of the stuff that you've already made, and potentially you might have to make small tools that can help you to speed up the workflow. If you work in any studio, I'm sure if they have the pipeline with designer, they will have specific nodes that will, instead of taking you 3 clicks, it will take you 1 click. And over the span of the whole production, that can be, let's say, I don't know, a week. And that week can be spent polishing the whole material library, or a couple of extra textures here and there, or making some new ones. So knowing where you can reuse and going back to understanding the game that you're building, help what essentially helps you make better textures, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's there's so much things about that's the thing, is like you don't always like you just nailed it there. Is like you don't have to be like always doing everything from the beginning. Like I understand there's this sort of like feeling of like, oh, I need to make everything in the scene. But if you've already made it, like say if you've made a previous project, and you want to make a similar thing in your new project, just carry that over.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like just think smart, think logically, because exactly what Stefan just said there is like it's all about time. Like if you can learn how to be more efficient with your time, like time is like it's the thing at the end of the day that makes or breaks everything when it comes to being like a smooth running production, basically. It just makes, because you don't want anyone being a bottleneck at the end of the day when it comes to working in the industry, because there's nothing more stressful, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can reuse anything that you've previously done or modify it slightly to get a slightly different look, absolutely do it, because that extra time you can spend doing something else, and this is a huge bonus in production.
Definitely.
Especially when you have deadlines, like E3, or you're ready for the launch of the game or whatever.
Like when it comes to, I guess, like speaking on the whole idea of like I guess production stuff, or just learning in general, like when it comes to like sources and stuff, like, so I always like to ask about like online sources, whether maybe it's online courses or like just anything in general for like learning. Has there been any sort of like great things that you've learned from, like a tremendous amount. Like obviously, like one of the main things, like the main guy I learned from is Josh Lynch.
Yeah, he's a legend.
He's a legend. He's the man. Is there anything that just comes to mind when it comes to like can help the guys listening in just now?
So in terms of production, I think the biggest one that I use currently is if I have a piece of concept or reference of what we want this material to look like.
Mm-hmm.
I take sort of that almost that pattern, if that makes sense, and go on textures.com and find a high-res version or a scan or potentially a substance that is already done, because I know that material is calibrated and delit and it's run through all of the correct sort of processes to almost make it game ready, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with mega scans, because all of it is PBR game ready scanned. You know that the albedo that you'll be using hasn't got AO, hasn't got light information, is a solid workflow to potentially extract information. That's something that Josh actually mentioned in one of his ArtStation material mentorships.
Awesome.
Is don't go on Google and be like, oh, red brick, and then find the first brick that someone's taken a picture of.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to have sunlight, shadows, moss, or grunge that you don't want to have that. And if you use that, you could potentially sort of alter the complete look of the image.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to make sure that you use clean data to work from. So textures.com absolutely is a must to use. Because I think over the last few years they've been branching a lot in scans and PBR stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A lot.
Nah, that's good. Anything else?
The other thing was that you mentioned is level 80 is. I know that it's been mentioned a couple of times on podcast, but it does not get enough credit, I think.
Yeah.
The amount of good stuff that goes on there, even if it's from a student or somebody who's been in the industry for 30 years, you will always pick something that you didn't know. And if you do that, you'll be like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm going to try next time I do a material.
Mm-hmm.
Or you make a note of it and you refer to it the next time. Level 80 is an absolute goldmine, I'm telling you.
That's the thing. So I actually had the privilege to talk to Kirill on the podcast, and it's like the amount of stuff they've been doing over the years. I'm not aware how many years they've been doing it, but it's like they literally have been gathering all the best ways of doing things, and the most efficient ways, like you're saying, the pipelines, etc. Particularly, obviously, very heavy for environment artists. So literally everything we're talking about, it's so much. There's so much great sources there to utilize, and the scary thing is I think so many people are still under this sort of I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this, but I like to actually invest money into good tutorials. A lot of people still are under this sort of loop. Oh, I'm trying to get it for free, but I feel like you really need to start. If you're coming to your third and your fourth year of university, obviously I understand money can sometimes be really difficult as a student, but obviously you want to find the best resources possible. But really start thinking about where to invest money and trying to actually learn things that are going to really speed up your skill set production.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong in buying a couple of, materials or going on a substance source to get a couple of the materials they've got there, just to see how they have done it, and potentially extract something from there to apply it to your own. Obviously, don't use the whole thing and claim it as your own, because that's just wrong. But learn from it and apply it to what you're trying to create. Because when you're going to be in the game industry, you'll have to potentially go in somebody else's substance file and rework it or improve it, and just making sure that you have these little sort of know-hows can really speed up your product, but your asset essentially.
Yeah.
So like you said, time is at the essence, especially as a third year, when you want to make the best environment, character, animation, or whatever. If you can sort of buy a couple of tutorials here and there to sort of help you speed along or potentially teach you something new, you definitely should invest in it.
Yeah, because there's I think there's I'm trying to think who is the artist's name. Like there's a lot of things on like Gumroad.
Oh yeah.
Like Gumroad's meant to be like a really good one for that sort of thing. Even like breakdowns and like poly count. Like there's lots of forums and stuff to go through and actually utilize. That obviously are free as well. And then like obviously like the big ones, like your big heavy hitters when it comes to learning is like your talks that you said, the GDC, like Pixel Logic. When I was learning a lot of my sculpting, it was through Pixel Logic, and just learning like the fundamentals through them, like the Gnomon tutorials. Like I like to bring up the Gnomon tutorials a lot because Gnomon do the Gnomon workshop, and oh my gosh, the Gnomon workshop was one of the best investments I did. So I spent, I think it was about £30. So £30 for like infinite, like literally all the best artists for environment art. Like I was like so happy because there's one environment piece that there's one artist, Devon Fay. I'm not sure. Have you ever heard of Devon Fay?
I don't think so, no.
Oh my god, he's so good. And pretty much, so I've always had a passion for like VFX, and he did like a full breakdown of his full process, and the fact that I literally got like hours of like content, and like he went in so much depth and detail. And like this is why I like to bring up the whole idea of investment, because like there's only so much, going back to the point you were mentioning earlier, there's only so much teachers can teach, and there's and then the main one, it's a lot of pressure to put on teachers as well, because they can only learn so much, because obviously like when I was in uni there was like literally like 10 different groups of artists. Like there'd be like your UI artists, your concept artists, you name it, like everyone was doing something different.
Yeah.
And it's like really daunting at times for like these teachers. So it's like sometimes like you just have to kind of do things at the side. Like how can you like think about how can I get ahead and get like that small advantage. And sometimes an extra like $10 or £10 or whatever it is can go a long way.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. If that's gonna get you the job in the industry, then I think £10 is a bargain.
Yeah.
Because if it's gonna potentially. If you've got 5 of your colleagues applying for the same job at the same studio, and you've done, the extra legwork to do something different than they've done, then why would you not want to do that?
Exactly.
And potentially once you get in the job, once you work a couple of months there, you can be like, hey, I know this person who will be a great fit for this role. Mm-hmm. So you've also helped them at the same time. Yeah.
Because like it's like, I don't know, I just wish people stopped, obviously I don't want to keep talking about it, but it's like, just don't overlook, like obviously, like I understand, like free stuff's great, like don't get me wrong, but there's, if you really want to progress as an artist, you have to take that extra step and take it from there. So, obviously when it comes to like the Student Art podcasts, I always like, obviously, base things on student education and stuff. I'm trying to think, what's the best one I can maybe ask you? Like, normally I always just say, like what's the benefits and stuff. Is there anything that you think maybe, I guess, what's the best way for me to word this? So I'm trying to think. I always ask this question, but I try not to make it too repetitive. So obviously, like there's this whole sort of thing about like online courses and like student education. I'm not sure, like, have you heard of any good online courses at all by any chance when it comes to student education?
There's a couple that definitely come to mind straight away, which is CGMA, Plural Science, Gnomon, like you mentioned, the Mentor Coalition, which is I know Josh Lynch runs that. He's part of it. I know CGMA is a massive one. I see a lot of people when they post stuff on our station, they say, just finished my my environment or my character or whatever with this person from CGMA. Mm-hmm. And I think they're starting to tip the balance in terms of the kind of content they teach to get people ready for the industry. Okay. Because those people which I've heard from podcasts are already in the industry, they teach stuff that have happened literally today. Yeah. As opposed to what happened in PS2 eras, Yeah, definitely. And if you can potentially do a couple of those courses before you maybe decide to go to university or alongside university to sort of further push yourself, then I think it's definitely worth the investment. I mean, if you're going to go to university in the UK, obviously, and you spend £9,000, I'm sure £300 on, an environment course, which will cover potentially new things like I mentioned, texture density, vertex normals, loading, trim sheets, which you might not learn at the course, then it's definitely worth investing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're fresh to the whole idea of game art or animation, and you don't really know much about these courses, then potentially university is the route for you. But kind of like by default. But I don't want to say by default because it sounds like, oh, I have to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I know what you mean. Like that's always the thing, because like obviously, like, I understand, like, a lot of people might like early on when I was doing the podcast, like, they were always raising the question, like, so like, why do I ask that type of question? And it's not necessarily to make there like a direct route, but it's just to open up the options. Like, there's so many great options out there, and I understand that there's so many students that maybe or maybe not just students, just artists in general who are struggling financially, and like there's so many ways of getting into the industry. There's one actual topic I'd be really cool to talk about. It's just like portfolio. Because like, for example, like your ArtStation is literally jam packed, man. Like, you've got so much stuff, it's insane. Just speaking on portfolio, is there any kind of like main tips or things that you've learned along the years? Like, has there been anything that you've noticed that it's good to kind of take out of your portfolio, or what to show? Does anything kind of like stand out to you when it comes to portfolio for texture artists?
I think one big one is don't do the same material twice.
Right.
Like, you see a lot of artists potentially do the same brick 3-4 times. At the end of the day, to an employer, a brick is a brick.
Yeah.
If you do a brick and then a lever and then some sand and then some grass, it shows a wider range of skills. Just like as an environment artist, if you do a bit of sculpting, a bit of texturing, or modeling hard surface, it shows a much wider array of skills that you can apply to the job. And especially as an environment artist, those things will come in needed. And if you potentially just do as an environment artist, let's say, I don't know, the same range of assets, let's say, like props, but if you don't put them in a scene and you light them and you say a bit of a story and you integrate them with a bit of a narrative, then you're really, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot, because at the end of the day, we make games for fun, obviously, but to also tell a story. And if you can't tell a story with the props that you're making, then it's potentially not gonna work out for you.
Yeah.
And you might have great props, but if you can't put them in a scene and then make them work, but you apply for a job that's still, the main thing is we want this person to tell narrative and storytelling for, let's say, for The Last of Us, then they're gonna be like, well, you're not showing that range of skills. But if you've got some assets that you've taken from the UE4 marketplace and you've lit them great, you've clearly shown narrative, and sort of you've put yourself in the game, in the seat of a game designer to see how would this play as a game. It obviously instantly ticks more boxes to an employer.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome topic. Thanks for bringing that one up, because when it comes to like, obviously, like when I naturally so I brought this up with Kyle. So me and Kyle were talking about doing, like, the common one for texture artists is like, for example, having just this sphere. And like, obviously, like, so for example, once again, everyone who's listening, like, Stefan's a great example. So he has so he has his spheres, but he also has his environments, like he's talking there, like the story aspect and stuff. So obviously, like, it's great to show tons of the spheres and show that range that we're talking about, but having that extra level is going to go, like, that extra distance. And like, what's your thoughts on like bringing on the topic of story, but do you think having just the spheres is a real, like, a no like the way things are kind of going now, or do you think, like, what's your thoughts on that?
Some would argue that the sphere is fine, and it's if it's going to show, hey, I can do this material, then that's fine. But if you want to really sort of say, okay, I want to be a material artist, I'm going to do sphere, I'm going to put it in a scene, I'm going to vertex blend it, I'm going to have 2-3 variations of it, with I don't know, let's say this brick is perfectly fine, then this brick is absolutely ruined, and this brick has a massive like a crack down. If you can show those materials put together with a vertex blend or a height blend in UE4, that will sort of instantly tick, like I said before, a lot more boxes.
Yeah.
Because you can do more than just make a pre-texture.
Yeah, and like that's the great thing as well. So like when it comes to like your portfolio, like speaking on this subject, like group things is an awesome idea. So like if you have a friend who is like a modeler, reach out to him if he's working on a project, or like try and collaborate together. So you don't necessarily you don't have to model it, like, but it's just down to bringing like talking about your point there, like utilizing like your texture in an actual scene. So reach out to people that you know, to like work together as a team, work smart, and that also highlights the vibe of like you're like working together with people and you understand how things kind of work, because like group projects and like teamwork is everything at the end of the day. Like you have to be obviously able to work with people.
Yeah, and that's a big thing when you apply for your job. You get the interview, which is pretty much, some would argue that that's got you the job already, because they know you can do the art. They just want to see what you like as a person.
Yeah.
So if you can say, okay, I collaborate with this person from Polycount, or 10K from Facebook, or someone from university, it all just shows you've got soft skills. You can collaborate, you can manage, you can decide how to sort of progress with whatever you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
That instantly sort of ticks more boxes without even having them ask you, have you ever worked in a group project? What was that like? What was the pitfalls? Because you've already said that in potentially your CV or your cover letter.
Yeah.
So they can be like, how did you find it? Or, what did you like about it? Instead of asking 4 questions, they ask only 1, because they already know the answer.
Mm-hmm. Like that, like speaking of like soft skills, like it's crazy how like this is the one thing that I've always wanted to do. So it's one thing I'm hopefully it's not like hopefully I will do it. It's eventually, like, so the one thing I've always liked to do is just help people in general, and encourage people to kind of get more confident. I wish there was more of a, I know this is like maybe a lot to kind of put certain people like on the spot straight away, but like early on, so like in the first and second year of university, I like to kind of like try and get people out of their shell more, or like try and at least kind of put people in a situation that they kind of have to right, I'm now under pressure, I now have to like step up my game or get more confident and stuff. Like one of the best quotes, I'm trying to think, it was actually like this is a great thing. I think it was actually in the film I was watching today. So there's this film that I really love. It's called Deja Vu. Have you ever seen it? Like Denzel Washington.
It rings a bell. Yeah, I think I've seen it a long time ago. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's like it's a bit confusing with the mind. It's, do you know, like we were talking earlier about Inception. So before the podcast, folks, I always ask the guests like what's their favorite film, and Stefan mentioned Inception, and I'm so sorry, but I've never seen the film. Everyone, if you're wondering, I still need to get up to date with it. But it's just like, I don't know. It's just like in the film, basically what he was saying is like there's this one part in the scene that I won't ruin any spoilers, but it was like getting out of your comfort zone is like the only way to improve, and forcing yourself in a situation that you're not necessarily comfortable with is like one of the best places to ever be. And like I bring up a lot of times like presentation. Like what was it like when you were at university when it came to like was most people tend to be like quite shy, or was there anything that they kind of did to like help, I guess?
I mean, I think everyone was the typical, I don't want to go first, I'm gonna try and stay back. But I know you mentioned a couple of times where you wanted to be the first one.
Yeah.
I was exactly like that, because I just wanted to obviously get out of the way to sort of calm myself for the rest of the lecture or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I almost wanted to set the bar, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I wanted to sort of just make sure that I sort of set the standard quite high. Mm-hmm. Obviously make sure that I had the right content, I had the right note to talk about. I was confident in what I was talking about. I sort of wanted to just make sure that I was, I didn't want to put this pressure on myself by having all these people go before me and be like, oh, I should have had that in mind. Oh, I can't believe he said that. I was going to say that.
Yeah.
Now, if you go first, you pretty much lay it out on the table how it is,
Yeah.
and you set the bar essentially.
You own the floor.
Exactly, yeah. So I think people could be, like the lecturers know and the students know that every single one of them who's going to be doing that presentation is going to be nervous to some
Yeah.
extent. But if you can be like, okay, take a deep breath, have a drink, and just go there.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing can go wrong. You might stutter a couple of times,
Yeah.
but once you get the ball rolling, it's just going to flow naturally.
Definitely. I'm so happy you said that, because like for example, with me, right? So my it probably makes sense why I do these podcasts, but so the one thing that I kind of enjoy the most, so I love to talk, right? I love a good chat, like a good blather. That's my comfort zone, and but one of the main things when it came to presentations and getting over that like sort of like hump of pressure for me personally was being prepared. It's so cliche, but the more prepared you are for a presentation, or like say if you're a bit nervous for anything, the more you know about that topic, the more easy it is to talk about. So like, for example, every time I bring on a guest, like we're all like geeking out about art, like we love art. Like you're listening to this podcast because you love art and you want to learn and stuff. So just be yourself. And like for example, I tend to have I'm not sure what you're like, man, but I always move my hands about like crazy. So like I'm like almost like at the opera or whatever, and like performing my sort of I'm just like walking side by side, like going back and forth when I'm doing a presentation. Everyone's like, dude, this guy doesn't stand still, but that's just how I do my thing, and try and find like the thing that makes it most easier for you. Like this is a film that I actually liked watching as a kid. I'm not sure what people are going to say about this, but have you ever heard of a film called, I think it's Made in Manhattan? It's like a love romance sort of film. It has like
I've heard of it, yeah.
Oh, it's actually an awesome film. So anyone who's like slating me, it's awesome. You're just jealous. But it's like Jennifer Lopez, and there's a wee boy in the film, and the thing that he gets passed on by one of the main antagonists or the main antagonist is the thing that actually comforts him in real life is like pressing a paperclip in his hand, and like I always try to find like the thing that makes it easier for me. Like some people, I know it sounds obvious, but it's like if you think having something in front of you like to hold on, it makes it easier for you, then go with that. Like sometimes having like a laptop just to make it kind of feel easier. I know it's like a small thing, but it kind of helps. It goes a long way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like even like especially in interviews when you potentially go for your first job, the person who's going to be interviewing you, they know you're a graduate. They know you're nervous. You know, they understand where you're coming from. So don't put yourself in the pressure of, oh my God, I'm going to Ubisoft and I'm going to be talking with the art director.
Yeah.
They were in your seat 20 years ago doing exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
And they will just make you so casual and so almost unofficial the interview that you won't even realize that you weren't nervous.
Like it's crazy because like the one thing I always like to just bring up is like you just have to be yourself. And so I had an interview a while back, and for example, like a lot of studios tend to wear like maybe like they have a top similar to the studio or whatever, or a game orientated and stuff. And the whole topic was Game of Thrones, and I just started before we even had like a chance to like sit down. That we were just like geeking out about Game of Thrones, and like the whole tension just went, and I was just being myself again. Like to me personally, like, interviews is kind of like I don't know, like I've always found it like a relaxing thing, but I understand that. I don't know. I wish people at university maybe started doing like testers of like a little like test of interviews, if that made sense.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, from my experience at university, we had like career talks from like the career department on how you should tailor your cover letter, your CV, what you should have, what you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But they were general do's and don'ts and tips.
Yeah.
Like they weren't specific to the game sort of industry or the VFX or the film. And I think a lot of universities need to tailor that more to the course that you're doing. And potentially, because the guys, the lecturers who are there, they still have contacts in the industry. They can be like, hey, we're going to be graduating soon. can you give us some tips, or what kind of questions you potentially might ask, so we can sort of tell our students, how to prepare potentially. Obviously, not give it away, but like ease them into it if one of us applies at that specific studio. And I don't think that's done enough to help students prepare themselves for the interview.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
definitely.
Like, you obviously have to do your own homework, where research the studio, what the culture is like, their about section, what games they're working on. Make sure that you've done your research and your notes on that studio. So when the obvious question about the studio is, oh, so what do you think of Ubisoft or Frontier? Have you played any of our games?
Mm-hmm.
If you say no, that's perfectly fine. If you say yes, what did you like specifically about them? And if you can give them a solid answer that shows you've done your research and your homework about it, they can be like, okay, this person's clearly done their homework. They're not just walked into the interview being like, yeah, I don't know anything about you. Sorry.
Yeah, like this has been such a great podcast, because there's so much different things that have been new that I've not brought before. And the fact that is because I've already like I said, this is my 38th episode, and there's so many different things that obviously everyone brings to the table. And when it comes to just the whole idea of education, I think I understand, and I keep bringing up the point, there's so much stuff to cover, but that's why I like to raise the one of guest speakers and stuff. When people bring a guest speaker to do a talk, the only thing I struggle with that kind of thing is that there's no kind of one-to-one or hand-on sort of experience or situation with it, because obviously when it comes to the whole topic of interviews, it's so easy to say what you should do, but until you put it into practice, there's you don't actually learn anything from it.
Yeah, absolutely. You obviously have to make sure that you read sort of the application in terms of what this person is going to be doing, potentially your role, and what we want this person to sort of have in their portfolio in order to do the job properly, but also expect the unexpected. Yeah. Because you might have, all these questions of, how would you do this material? Talk us through how would you do, this and that. What would you improve? These are fairly common questions that you'll get in an interview. But also, you got to make sure you're prepared for questions that you'll be like, oh, I didn't think they were going to ask me, what do you think of our game, or what's your favorite film?
Yeah.
Or anything that might catch you off guard. Sort of expect it, but then almost have an answer ready.
Definitely. Because
that can catch you off guard, and it can sort of probably they do it on purpose to see how you react to certain situations.
Yeah.
And if you can sort of take a second to think about it, and then be like, oh, actually, I think this and that, or I think my favorite film is this because of that.
Yeah.
Then they can see that, okay, this person's clearly thought through, and they, and yeah.
No, that's great, because to finish off that point, you made a great point there. So take your time when you're asking the questions. There's no pressure to rush it. Literally just take a breath, step at a time, and just think about it, and just be as honest as you can. Just be yourself. No, but that's awesome. That's a great way to end the podcast. Thank you so much, man, for coming on, by the way. That's been a really great podcast. I really do appreciate that. Everyone who's been tuning in today, like I said, please go give him a follow. Like I said, all his work will be highlighted on screen right now. So I take it it's... so I know you said the other day, so you're new to or you don't use Twitter that much, but so you've got Twitter, you've got an ArtStation. Is there anything else you use? Do you use Instagram?
Not really. I use LinkedIn quite often. So if anyone's got any questions, just shoot them through LinkedIn or just ArtStation, and I'm quite quick to get back to people.
Awesome.
But obviously I'm at work most of the time, so
you're a busy person.
Busy person, yeah.
But that's the thing. Excuse me. I was literally I missed a podcast on the weekend because I lost my voice. I've finally got back my voice again. Everyone who's tuning in, like you said, asking questions. If you do have any questions that you want maybe me to raise in the next podcast or the next textual artist as well, fire it in the comments below. And reach out to Stefan. Like, he's just opened things up to you. Like, obviously he's going to be busy, so he won't be able to answer straight away, but he'll do his best. And the same with me. I use LinkedIn as well. Fire a question anytime. But if it's easier, so if it's a long question or something specific, I probably do it through LinkedIn because it's more, I guess, personal, makes it easier. Whereas it's in YouTube, it's a wee bit, obviously, a bit more crowded or a bit more difficult for you to get everything out, if that makes sense. But if you're new to the podcast, don't forget to subscribe. That'll be much appreciated. Don't forget to leave a like. Until next time, folks, we will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.